What would you do if your generosity was used against you? If a small act of kindness turned into a nightmare? When my Uncle Frank passed away, I wasn't expecting much. He was a private man, the type who kept to himself and didn't bother with small talk. So when the lawyer handed me his will and I saw what he left me, I was shocked. A storage facility. Not money, not a house. Just a 5,000 square foot warehouse on the edge of town. I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of it. My wife, Melissa, nearly choked on her coffee when I told her. "A storage facility?" she said, wiping her mouth. "That's different. What are you going to do with it?" I had no idea. Sell it, maybe. It wasn't fancy. 20 units, a small office, a metal fence around the lot. It needed a fresh coat of paint, but Uncle Frank kept it in decent shape. If I sold it, we could finally afford that kitchen remodel Melissa had been dreaming about. I was still figuring things out when the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Diane Reynolds, president of our HOA. She was the type of woman who always knew everything about everyone. Sometimes before they even knew it themselves. Her blonde bob was perfectly styled, not a single hair out of place, and she wore the same fake friendly smile she used whenever she had an idea that really just meant trouble for someone else. "David," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I just heard about your inheritance. How exciting!" I hadn't even told my neighbors yet. Of course, Diane already knew. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. "The timing is just perfect," she said. "The HOA has been struggling with storage. Our seasonal decorations, maintenance equipment, the shed behind the clubhouse is falling apart." I nodded slowly, sensing where this was going. "We were wondering," she continued, leaning in slightly, "if you'd be willing to let the HOA use a tiny section of your new property. Just one unit, just until we figure out a permanent solution." Melissa raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It seemed like a harmless request. 1 unit out of 20? I wasn't even sure I wanted the place, I sighed. "Yeah, I guess that would be fine. Just temporary." Diane clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. I'll have Tom drop off a formal agreement tomorrow." I should have known. Nothing was ever that simple with the HOA. 3 days later, I drove to the storage facility, ready to start cleaning out Uncle Frank's old belongings. But as I turned onto Maple Road, I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked. The parking lot was packed. Cars, trucks, even a trailer carrying what looked like a small fishing boat. People were everywhere, unloading furniture, bikes, holiday decorations, stacks of plastic bins. Someone was even wheeling a motorcycle into one of the units. I pulled over and got out, pushing through the crowd. Diane Reynolds stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, directing people like she was running an airport. "Diane," I called, my voice barely cutting through the noise. "What the hell is going on?" She turned, smiling like this was a completely normal situation. "David, isn't this wonderful? Everyone is so grateful for your generosity." My generosity? I stared at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "I agreed to let the HOA use 1 unit. 1. Not the whole damn place?" Diane's smile didn't budge. "Oh, I know. But when I mentioned it at our emergency board meeting, we realized this could solve so many storage problems for the community." She gestured around like she was unveiling a brand new neighborhood park. "The Jensens needed space while they move. The Wilsons are renovating their basement, and the Gundersons. Well, you know how hard it is to store summer vehicles." I blinked. "Summer vehicles?" I turned just in time to see Mr. Gunderson guiding a jet ski into unit number 6. "You can't just do this," I said, my voice sharp now. "This is my property." Diane's expression didn't change, but her tone did. Lower, more controlled. "Actually, David, the HOA board voted to amend the bylaws last night. She handed me a document. Bylaw Amendment 47.3, Community Storage Access. I barely heard the next part because my pulse was pounding in my ears. The board determined that since you've designated this as a community resource, it must be equally accessible to all paying members. I looked up at her. This isn't even within HOA boundaries. Tom Reynolds, her husband, and the HOA's lawyer stepped forward. Actually, the property line falls exactly 8 feet inside our jurisdiction, he said smoothly. I double-checked the county maps. I scanned the paper, trying to wrap my head around what I was reading. This can't be legal. Diane's fake smile tightened. Oh, David, let's not make a scene. Do you really want to be the guy who takes back storage from your neighbors? Look around. These are people you see every day. Their kids play with your kids. I felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on me. People whispering, a few shaking their heads. Across the lot, Karen Mitchell, our street's self-appointed rule enforcer, crossed her arms. I already moved my garage stuff in here. You're not seriously saying you're kicking us all out, are you? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I was outnumbered. I could fight back right here, right now, but it wouldn't change anything. The HOA had already decided. The bylaws were changed, the papers were printed, and my name was already in the newsletter as the generous donor of this community storage space. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. I clenched my jaw, took a deep breath, and forced my hands to unclench. We'll talk about this later, I said through gritted teeth. Diane patted my arm like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Of course, but in the meantime, could you help the Andersons with their grandfather's armoire? They're struggling to fit it into unit number 8. I didn't respond. I turned, walked back to my car, and drove home. My hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't over. Not even close. A week later, I drove back to the storage facility, determined to start reclaiming what was mine. But when I pulled up to the gate, something was off. Every single unit had a new padlock. I stepped out of my car, my stomach tightening. I pulled out my keys, went to the unit I knew was mine, and tried to unlock it. The key didn't fit. None of my keys did. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard footsteps behind me. Sorry, David, came a voice I really didn't want to hear. I turned to see Karen Mitchell standing with her arms crossed, the same smug look she always had when writing up people for leaving their Christmas lights up too long. We had to change the locks, she said. Security reasons. I let out a sharp laugh. Security reasons? For my own property? Karen shrugged. There was a report of suspicious activity the other night. The HOA Security Committee voted to replace all locks for the safety of the community. I clenched my jaw. And when exactly do I get a key? Karen gave me an apologetic smile, the kind of smile that meant she wasn't sorry at all. Diane said she'd get you a master key eventually. I was about to argue when my phone buzzed. A new email, Sycamore Heights HOA Community Newsletter. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. Local homeowner donates storage facility to community. Grand opening today. My name was right there in the first paragraph. The article made it sound like I had happily handed over my property as a selfless act of generosity. It even quoted me. Except, of course, I had never said any of it. I scanned the parking lot. My neighbors were smiling at me. Some even waved. That was so kind of you, Mrs. Patel said, adjusting the boxes in her trunk. It's not every day someone makes such a big donation to their community. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could, she added, Oh, I told my sister's family. They're moving soon, and were wondering if they could store a few things here too. I couldn't even get a word in. Every time I tried to correct someone, they just smiled and thanked me again. And when I finally found Diane, she was in full politician mode, shaking hands and taking credit for working with me to make this happen. "You're really something, David," she said, giving me that same rehearsed smile. "A true community leader." I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a breath in through my nose. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was war, and the HOA was just getting started. That night, I came home to find my garbage cans tipped over, trash scattered across my front lawn. Taped to my door was a bright orange violation notice: improper garbage receptacle storage, $50 fine mailbox height non-compliant, $75 fine unauthorized garden stones, $100 fine excessive bird feeders, $50 fine, each one signed by Diane Reynolds. Melissa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking pale. "This isn't just about the storage anymore," she said quietly. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Number, it's not." She swallowed hard. "Maybe we should just let it go. I mean, we barely even wanted the place. Is this really worth the fight?" I looked at the mess in our yard, at the humiliation of being pushed around and lied about, at the entire neighborhood believing I had done something I never agreed to. They wanted me to give up. That's how they had gotten away with this for so long. I turned to Melissa. "I don't care what it takes," I said, voice steady. "I'm taking back what's mine." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of old papers and files from Uncle Frank's office. If the HOA was going to steal from me, I needed to figure out why. There had to be a reason they wanted my storage facility so badly. Melissa sat across from me, scrolling through county records on her laptop. "Frank really kept everything," she muttered, flipping through a dusty binder labeled Property Documents, Maple Road. I picked up an old survey map and traced the property line with my finger. My storage facility sat just outside the HOA's official boundary. But then, why were they claiming they had control over it now? "Wait," Melissa said, pausing. She squinted at her screen. "Look at this." She turned her laptop toward me, and I scanned the document. It was a county violation notice. Not for me, but for the HOA. HOA citation. Improper equipment storage. Violation pending. I scrolled down to the details. The HOA had been warned 3 separate times about illegally storing maintenance equipment behind the clubhouse. They had until the end of the month to fix the issue, or face a massive fine. My pulse quickened. "That's why they did it," I muttered. "They didn't want to spend HOA money on a new storage solution, so they stole mine instead." Melissa scrolled further and gasped. "You're going to want to see this." She pulled up an invoice. A formal estimate from a construction company to build a brand new HOA storage facility. Total cost, $50,000. Date: 1 day before Diane asked you for just 1 unit. I sat back in my chair, jaw clenched. They had no intention of ever building their own storage. They knew exactly what they were doing when Diane came to my house with her fake smile and her sweet talk about just a tiny section. She and her husband Tom used a loophole in the bylaws to take my property instead of spending money. Melissa exhaled. "David, this is fraud." I stood up, grabbing my keys. "I need to call Miguel." Miguel was an old friend from college, a real estate lawyer who had seen his fair share of HOA corruption cases. When I showed him the documents, he let out a low whistle. "This is worse than I thought," he said, flipping through the pages. "They didn't just twist the rules, they outright lied." "Can we stop them?" I asked. Miguel nodded. "Oh yeah. This cease and desist order will put the fear of God into them." He started typing. "We'll also demand they immediately remove HOA property from your facility, return control to you, and cease any further attempts to enforce fake bylaws." I exhaled in relief. Finally, I had something solid to fight back with. Miguel looked up. But David, be ready for this to get ugly. People like Diane, they don't back down without a fight. I already knew that, but I also knew something else. I wasn't backing down either. I sat in my car, staring at the draft email on my phone. Every part of me hated what I was about to do, but if I wanted to take Diane and the HOA down, I had to play this carefully. I took a deep breath and typed the final sentence. After much thought, I've decided to accept the HOA's position and allow full community access to my storage facility. I hit send. Melissa was pacing in the living room when I walked back inside. I still think this is crazy, she said. You're just letting them have it? Not exactly. I held up a small black security camera. I'm setting a trap. Melissa stopped pacing. You really think they'll fall for it? They won't be able to help themselves, I said. I spent the next few hours installing hidden cameras inside several storage units, small enough to go unnoticed, but clear enough to capture everything. If I was right about Diane and Tom, they weren't just using my facility for storage. They were hiding something. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of emails and texts from neighbors. My inbox was full of messages like, David, what an incredible gift to the neighborhood. So generous of you. Can't believe you did this for us. Diane had already spread the word. She wanted everyone to believe I was on her side, which was exactly what I needed. That night, I parked a few streets away from the facility and watched from a distance. It was quiet for most of the evening. Then, just before midnight, a black SUV pulled up. I leaned forward. Diane and Tom stepped out, each carrying large cardboard boxes. They checked the lot, making sure no one was around, then hurried inside. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. The cameras had caught everything. Diane and Tom sneaking in, whispering about the county investigation. Tom opening a storage unit, stuffing stacks of files and folders inside. Diane muttering, if they find these invoices, we're screwed. I paused the video and stared at the screen. There it was. Proof. They weren't just stealing my property. They were covering up something bigger. And now, I had them exactly where I wanted them. The night of the emergency HOA meeting, the community center was packed. People who had never bothered to attend a meeting before were there, whispering to each other, curious why I had called for a last-minute gathering. Diane sat at the front, her usual fake smile plastered on, pretending to be unbothered. She had no idea what was coming. I walked up to the front of the room, plugged in my laptop, and cleared my throat. Before we begin, I have something important to share. I clicked play. On the projector screen, the room watched in stunned silence as the hidden camera footage rolled. There was Diane and Tom, sneaking into the storage facility in the middle of the night. There was Tom, stuffing stacks of files and folders into a unit. There was Diane, whispering, if they find these invoices, we're screwed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, oh my God. I let the video play to the end, then turned to face Diane. She sat frozen, her face pale. Tom shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. I wasn't done yet. I set a folder on the table. These are county property records, I said. They prove that my storage facility isn't even within HOA boundaries. That means the HOA had no legal right to take it. Murmurs turned into outraged voices. I dropped another stack of papers on the table. And this, I tapped the folder, is proof that the HOA has been stealing from us for years. Fake consulting fees, inflated landscaping contracts, and I held up a highlighted page. Nearly $50,000 in missing playground renovation funds. Diane shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. David is just twisting things to make us look bad. But no one was listening to her anymore. The community had turned. A neighbor stood up. You told us we needed to raise HOA fees for maintenance, but you were just lining your own pockets? Another neighbor, arms crossed, glared at Tom. You said we couldn't afford a new pool heater, but you had no problem writing checks to your brother-in-law's fake construction company. Diane's usual charm was useless now. The doors opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Diane Reynolds? Tom Reynolds? One of them said. We need to speak with you. The room exploded. Some people shouted in anger. Others just sat there, stunned, shaking their heads. A few turned to me, muttering apologies. They had believed the lies. Diane and Tom tried to leave quietly, but there was no quiet way to be escorted out by police. As the doors shut behind them, the room fell silent. For the first time in a long time, the HOA had no one left to control it, and I finally had my storage facility back. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Diane had resigned from the HOA, citing personal reasons. Tom quietly stepped down as well, though it was clear he had much bigger problems to worry about. Other board members, realizing they'd been caught in the middle of a scandal, either quit or disappeared from community meetings altogether. With no leadership left, the HOA was falling apart. But instead of chaos, something surprising happened. People actually started working together. At the next meeting, Mrs. Schmidt, one of the longest-standing residents, was nominated as interim president. First order of business, she said, adjusting her glasses. We're getting rid of these ridiculous rules that were only ever used to control people. The vote was unanimous. No more fines for mailbox height, bird feeders, or garden stones. No more fake violations meant to bully homeowners. For the first time in years, it actually felt like a neighborhood again. As for me, I got my storage facility back. I could have sold it. That was the plan from the start, wasn't it? But after everything that had happened, I saw it differently now. This wasn't just a building. It had become the center of everything. So instead of selling, I turned it into something real. A community space, one that actually belonged to the people, not some corrupt HOA, a place where neighbors could store things, hold meetings, or even just grab a cup of coffee and talk. The strangest part? People actually showed up to help. The same neighbors who had ignored me when Diane was running things now wanted to make things right. One morning, as I was painting over the old Sycamore Heights HOA storage sign, I found an envelope taped to my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $112,000 and a small note. For the tree. I'm sorry. Tom. I stared at it for a long time. Then I knew exactly what to do. The following weekend, we planted 20 oak trees throughout the neighborhood. Everywhere the HOA had ordered them cut down in the past. Neighbors showed up with shovels, watering cans, and kids running around in the dirt. The same people who once stood by while the HOA tried to crush me were now standing beside me, fixing what had been broken. Melissa wiped her hands on her jeans and looked around. Funny how things turn out, she said. You inherited a storage building and ended up with something much bigger. I nodded, watching as the last tree was planted. They tried to steal from me, I said, but in the end they gave me something better.